Thank you. Welcome back to Senate Education. So now we're shifting to the 2200 series, which I am about to repeat. I think what Ledge Council just said has all of the rules and regulations requirements for our independent schools in the state of Vermont.
For program approval.
For program approval. So for example,
Maintaining a register of enrollment.
Okay.
I mean, everything.
we won't have you read them through since Hayden's gonna print them up and we can look at them at our leisure. But generally, these are the things that if you want public funding, well, you're gonna need to do or no?
Both.
Both,
So
okay.
remember, prior to so right now, an approved independent school is approved to receive public funds.
Right.
It's not until July 1, 2023 that the Act 173 changes take effect.
Okay.
Once those changes take effect, should you do nothing, should the legislature make no other changes, in order to be eligible to receive public funds, you have to agree to admit students on an IEP if they're placed there, etc. You can still be an approved independent school and not accept students on an IEP.
But
You're getting zero public dollars, but you can still be an approved independent school. And if that's the case, there would still be a whole host of things that apply to you for the approval process. And so these rules, historically, these are the rules. The 2200 series are the approval process for independent schools. That's what kicked the updates to those rules. And disagreement amongst different stakeholders is what led to that Act 49 study committee.
it's the rules, yeah. That's right.
And then, and remember that the rules, there was initiation for rulemaking in 2015. There was not a consensus on what those rules should look like for the approval process. What should be required of independent schools? Act 49 said, let's put together a study committee to see if we can reach some consensus. There was no real consensus reached. There were things that the committee agreed on, but there was no official report of these are the recommendations we are making to the legislature.
Government at its best.
And then the rules out of the 2018 legislative session came Act 173.
Okay.
But Act 173 had a long onboarding, right?
Yeah.
For many reasons. A large part of that is funding. The funding changed from a block grant to a census model, I believe. And so there needed to be a lot of time for districts to budget for that change. And so there's a slow phase in of the funding process. Also, Act 173 made that requirement of schools, independent schools. So the rules had to reflect that. If you're going to approve an independent school, and part of receiving public funds hinges on something, that should be reflected in the rules. So the rules were then updated. And that process, I believe, involved a lot of stakeholder conversations. And the end result is the 2200 series you see today. That went in front of LCAR last April, I believe. And some of the rules went into effect on adoption. And the rest of the rules take effect on July 1, 2023, when all of the legislative authority that gives the state board the authority to make some of these requirements takes effect.
Okay. May I ask a quick question? Act 173 goes into effect in July.
Yes.
Hewlett Academy, approved independent school right now. They just got approved they got approved in June. Are they going to be given 5 years or so without having to comply?
I think that would be a question for the state board of ed.
Okay.
On
Because-
how they are handling that.
Okay. I mean, what I could see us doing, something for the community, about saying 5 years, no, we get everybody sort of moved up so that all the approved independent schools have to comply. Does that make sense? that make sense? So instead of, so if you had you had a school that decides their approval is in June of 2023, they're not required to follow Act 173 until July, and their next approval isn't for 5 years. It sounds like we're giving them 5 years of no requiring special education. What I'm saying is, what if we say, no, you have to move up somehow and then get, it's just something for the committee to think about. I'm thinking about the anti-discrimination stuff too. Yes.
A reasonable person would say, it's only gonna be a month, why don't we just do it for?
A reasonable
be
person would
compliant
indeed say,
with
wait
173.
until,
Right.
July. I'm
So-
thinking,
so-
let's say the academy, some academy did it a year ago.
That would
Move
be
up
good.
to sort of,
So the law will be clear on July 1, 2023, that if a approved independent school wants to receive public funds, they have to agree to admit a student on an IEP who's placed there with them. You would need to hear from the field on how they are dealing with the situation we're talking about.
and we are hearing from them next week, so we can ask that of the state board.
The anti-discrimination piece
Yes.
is in effect today.
Okay, so tell us about the anti-discrimination piece.
So there are a couple rules that took effect on adoption, which was last spring. And one of those rules is, two of those rules that are really applicable to this conversation. There's 4 rules that took effect. One is the approval process kind of procedures. One is a reciprocity rule, and then the 2 rules that are really applicable to this conversation are the application and the approval rules. And so the application rule requires that as part of an application to be an approved independent school, section 2226. And I'm looking at it without page numbers, so you'll have to find section 2226.
22, 26.
I mean,
Right,
sorry,
yes,
5.
yeah, I guess,
Yeah,
yeah.
part of that.
So these are all of the things that an application for initial approval. So you'll see section 2226 is application for approved independent schools and approved independent schools ineligible to receive public funds, right? There's those 2 categories after Act 173. So these are this is all of the information that an application is required to contain.
Okay.
And you'll see in rule 2226.6.
Yep.
Subdivision 1,
Yes.
a statement of non-discrimination posted on the school's website and included in the school's application materials. That is consistent with the Vermont Public Accommodations Act and the Vermont Fair Employment Practices Act. And an assurance signed by the head of school that the school complies with the Vermont Public Accommodations Act in all aspects of the school's admissions and operation. So that rule is in effect today.
Okay. And that was in 219, I mean, I know we dealt with it, and in 219, but that language was in 219?
Similar requirements.
Similar requirements, okay. And we need to check with the NEA and others, because I know they opposed that 219 last year on the anti-discrimination stuff, so you're gonna have to.
So that's the application.
Yeah, okay,
The approval rule is 2227.
okay.
This rule is also in effect today.
Okay.
And it's a little bit more harder to find, for me anyway.
Page 6 by my counting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bear with me here. Okay, rule 2227.7.
Okay,
So the state board has to make a finding
yeah,
prior to approval that the school has it's 2227.8. Sorry, there's, the rule is just a little,
oh, there it is.
right there.
Where
Here,
if you,
Oh, sorry.
The school substantially complies with all statutory requirements for approved independent schools and the board's rules for approved independent schools, including non-discrimination in admissions and operations. And then there's some other things. So those are the two anti-discrimination pieces. They're also required to comply with the mascot law that you all passed last year.
Do we have any of the time to at least take a quick view at the IEP concerns or the IEP rules? Because I know IEPs and private schools, there's some concern there, and I just want to have a full understanding of it.
I'll just point out that, let's see. Rule, section 2229 is the approval to receive public tuition. And so under this, it's going to contain, this rule is going to contain a lot of those requirements. Because right now in state law, that's the only thing on July 1, 2023.
Okay.
And so I think what you might be interested in is rule 2229.4, procedure for ensuring the provision of special education services to publicly funded students. And then there's lots of information in here about other pieces. I think that's probably what is going to be the most interesting to you.
One more question. So on the next page regarding the IEP teams, there's describes the hearing officer
Can you
and
tell me what section you're looking
sorry,
at?
I'm looking right. Sorry. So 229 and then
229.4.
yes.
Okay.
And the IEP team shall consider an alternative enrollment for the student. So who, I can't find the definition of who the hearing officer is and how the determination is made if a student with an IEP is looking at a private school and then they realize the resources aren't there. How do they make the determination that student actually should go somewhere else where they can get the resources?
So the decision on placement is the IEP team or the LEA probably working together. These rules don't speak to that internal analysis. That's probably more governed by the special education rules, and that's what goes into meeting a student's needs there. But Act 173 itself does talk about if there is a dispute on whether the student is whether those services can be provided there, and that would likely be between the school and the IEP team or the placing group, the LEA or the IEP team. So Act 173 does speak to that, but subdivision or subsection F talks a little bit about the hearing officer.
If there's a dispute between the LEA and the principal, okay?
And that's, I'm not doing a side by side of Act 173, but that is a concept that is found in Act 173. I can't guarantee you that it's the exact same language. That's as high a level as I can get to in this moment.
So I guess one more question, and if I'm just repeating myself, you can tell me. But I see below that there's the line of an approved independent school is not required to demonstrate it has the resources to serve every category of special education. So from what I'm understanding is if a student with an IEP tries to go to a school that does not have those resources, can that school then say, you don't have the resources and we can't adequately serve you? Is that?
So that would be, I'm trying to think of how to respond to that. So if there was a dispute between the LEA or the IEP team and the school on whether or not the services could be provided, there's a hearing process. it's not that the student wants to go there and the school is required to accept them.
Right.
It's that the IEP team or the LEA has done their homework
Mhm.
and is making a decision
On behalf
that
of
this
the kid.
school can meet this child's needs. The law is not explicit. The law does not say, the IEP team shall make a finding that, or, they have visited the school, they have interviewed all of these people, and they have made a determination that this school meets all of the child's needs, and therefore the school needs to accept this child. I think that's, by requiring the IEP team and the LEA, who's responsible legally for providing, making sure that child is having all of their needs met. If that team is making a decision that this school is a good placement for that child, they are theoretically making the decision that that school can meet that child's needs. If it turns out they can't, then there's a process for dispute about that. It could be that they can't.
And the school would be able to dispute that.
Yes, and I will say that we're looking at the rules, right? Statutes, though, are what we should be looking at first. And some of this process is laid out in law, not all of it, but some of it is laid out in law. And so we're late in the day, and I did not know that my testimony would be veering off into this.
Are you
today.
asking, is this a way that the school could use to discriminate against that child?
No,
If they say we can't meet your requirement?
no, I'm just wondering. No, I'm trying to find, because it's extremely nuanced, and I'm trying to figure out, like, let's say there's a parent who's saying, I want to send my kid to this school, but the IEP team is saying, that's actually not a good fit. I'd like to know what would happen there.
Oh, I can answer that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I thought I had answered that one. It's not the parent that gets to make this decision under Act 173.
I just want, right, I just wanted to reconfirm that, so
Yep,
thank you.
nope.
And then, so I'm just trying to learn the nuances and the details of IEPs, because it's been, there's been concern about being able to meet or being able to provide adequate services for IEP students. And, obviously I wouldn't want to inadvertently cause a student who has an IEP to go to a school where they can't get their needs met. So that's what I'm getting at.
Well, I think I just think you're pointing out some just basic inequities in the system, which is that public schools have to provide special education services to all students, and there are other schools that don't. And one issue that I think we're going to see play out is geography. I mean, if there is a school that happens to be, close to a student that has these needs, will that school be able to provide the services necessary? And if not, how will that play out? I mean, and that's just an open-ended question, but we'll see, I guess.
I mean, there have been tuitioning districts since 1869 at the very least. So there has been some amount of, there are districts that have existed for a long time that don't maintain their own schools and that tuition all of their students out, or a subset of their students out. And the likelihood of those districts having had students with special education needs somewhere along the way is high, right? So there is a history, I'm sure, from the field on how this has been handled prior to Act 173. And I would assume, we all know what that word stands for. I would assume that a lot of that went into the rulemaking process and the conversation around how Act 173, the end product that is Act 173. But you're right, the requirement to accept public funds, that carrot, that won't go into effect until July 1, 2023. So I think there are children that have been receiving special education services in independent schools, given our town tuition program for many, many years.
Sure.
But what that looks like when they have to do it to accept public funds, they have not been required to provide special education services. But the parents are hopefully a part of these decision-making processes, but it's not, Act 173 is not that the student wants to go there, it's that the IEP team or the LEA is making a decision that it's the right place and is placing the child there.
This has been incredibly helpful.
I did not know this is where we were going.
Well,
Yeah.
that's one of the great things about the legislature. So we want to shift to our guest who drove up from Massachusetts, Wyndham County. In our last 20, 30 minutes or so. We'll return to this, not today, but this has been, for me at least, very, very helpful. And this document is particularly helpful to have right in front of us as we make our way through the bill.
And I would
What
just
it
say, I will go back and reorient myself to the special education statutes.
And I did see Ted in the hallway who said they do have somebody over there that's going to be able to answer a lot of the
Great.
special education questions for us. I still might need another.
Plenty more.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
I
That was
believe,
really interesting.
yeah, well, it was great having you in the room, Mr. Rumper. Thanks for joining us. On the agenda, it says you're the director of the Compass School, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, because I have my writing, are you representing the Association of Independent Schools today, or are you just representing the Compass School in terms of your testimony?
I'm representing the Compass School
Great.
as an example of an independent school.
Okay.
And, you know, as you'll hear, one of my points that I want to make sure policymakers are really aware of is the great diversity of independent schools. And so that you really take into account that diversity as you create policy.
So with that, we'll let you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Compass School, and tell us your thoughts on page 483.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me. And thank you for your service to the state. And it's really great to be here at the State House. And I love how in Vermont, you can still just walk in and walk into the office. It's really just a great gift. And thank you again for your service. I'm going to read some comments that I prepared that I did send in. I might take some parenthetical commentary about it, and then I'd be happy to discuss stuff with you. And so, to be frank, especially sitting and listening to the Act 177 stuff and
173.
173, excuse me.
It's okay, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, that actually, the fact that I got the number wrong shows what I was about to say, is that I really just want to tell you a little bit the story of this one school and my experience and how it relates to this policy making. So my name is Eric Romberg. I'm the head of the school at the Compass School in Westminster in Wyndham County. I have serious concerns about Act 483, H483, and its potential impact on education in our state, and about what I see as a misguided basis for making educational policy. I've been a high school educator for 35 years, serving as a science teacher in both public and independent schools, and an adjunct graduate school professor in science education, and a middle and high school administrator and head of school. I feel inspired working in education, seen as one of the most fundamentally important and transformational activities in our community culture. I have the great pleasure of being part of the Compass School. I didn't put anything about our origin story in here, but we started in 1999. It was started by a group of community members in the greater Bellows Falls, Wyndham Northeast district who wanted to create an educational alternative. They did, their first efforts were to have the school be a fully public part of the district, and that effort failed. And so then they decided to establish the school as an independent school. So we're a small middle and high school which features a caring, close-knit, community-centered, holistic program dedicated to the success of every student. We emphasize hands-on education, integrated projects, a proficiency-based curriculum, assessment by exhibition, connecting with the outside community, social emotional learning, and a commitment to democracy and restorative practices. Kids come to our school for a variety of reasons. Many of them were not succeeding in their previous schools, whether it was due to anxiety and depression, which, as you all know, is on increase everywhere. Learning differences that weren't being well served, falling through the cracks, or getting bullied and harassed based on their neurodivergence, race, sexual orientation, or identity. Other students and families come to us because they simply prefer the health of our school community and our active integrated curriculum. We have a wonderful record of helping students gain the confidence and skills for success in college, work, and adult life. Our adult alumni, all of our alumni, tell us that their experiences at our school were pivotal for their happiness. We set our tuition by policy at the state approved public tuition average, and that's always been the case for 24 years. And presently, and this has been fairly typical in terms of percentages, about 40% of our students are publicly funded through town choice. The other 60% of our families pay tuition, and we do our best to offer as much need-based financial aid as we can make our school, financial aid as we can to make our school accessible to all. Over half of our families qualify for free and reduced lunch. And we are approved for and actively serve students with IEPs and 504s. We are non-discriminatory and actively welcome students who have not been thriving in their previous educational setting. We have a positive relationship with our public school district, who treats us as a partner in serving the kids and families in our region. H483 and policies like it, I fear, could crush small independent schools like mine, schools that are extraordinarily valuable parts of our educational ecosystem and worthy of public support. H483 requires that any approved independent school accepting public tuition must enroll publicly tuition students without first reviewing their needs, interests, and characteristics. I'm sure that's something that you all have been talking about. My view of that is that small schools need to be able to collaborate with families and students to ensure the school is a good fit, that the student and family knows about the community they're joining, and the school can ensure they have the resources to serve the kid and create a functioning and effective educational milieu. Small schools are successful where large schools can fail for needy students because the education is personalized. That's what makes us effective with the kids that seek us out. Schools like Compass use the enrollment process to determine if we are capable of caring for each student so that we can continue to care for every student. We use the enrollment process to help the student make a new commitment toward their own education. A blind enrollment process is antithetical to our personalized approach, which is precisely the unique value we offer to the kids and families who need us most. H483 also requires an assurance that no public funds are used to subsidize the tuition of private payer students. The objection to subsidizing students is, in my view, inappropriately commodifying them. Education is not a commodity, it is a relationship. At Compass, we enroll a community of kids doing our best to make it accessible to any student who will benefit and succeed in our community. They need each other to succeed. Being in relationship with the community is what the education is all about. This provision, I fear, would just hurt lower income families. You know, one thing about our school is, and this to my point of realizing the diversity of independent schools, is that, as I mentioned, we have a high number of the high percentage of schools, of students, families that qualify for free and reduced lunch. Our founding director used to quip, "Oh, great business plan. Let's make a private school for poor kids." But that's kind of what we've been doing, and we've been really successful with it for 24 years. But I worry about this provision. We have been activists in squeezing in low-income families who desperately need our school. The total revenue of the school goes into staffing and equipping the school to function as an integrated whole. The quote town pay kids and the non-town pay kids all need each other to make a vibrant and diverse community. It can't be separated into dollars subsidizing isolated kids. If the legislature intends to reduce discrimination and to serve marginalized kids, this bill could have the exact opposite effect, creating regulatory obstructions to squeeze out low-income kids from our school and schools like ours. Recently, a prospective student, this was just 2 weeks ago, visited my school with her family. And this little story is absolutely typical. She's a young trans woman who is currently schooled online. She needed to leave her large union high school after being bullied to the point of suicide attempts over her nonconformity. At a small community dinner that we had recently, where we hosted prospective families, she expressed real hope that she could actually fit in. Her family had tears in their eyes as they saw a safe haven for their child. Having a small school alternative available is crucial to providing equity to this student and her family. And so that's a major point of view that I would like to express, is that having diversity of school options that are accessible to families is crucial for equity. Forcing consolidation of all students into one building is not providing equity. And this family absolutely sees our school being there, and there aren't other resources like that in our region. Vermont's such a small state with low population. You know, I know that in maybe places like Burlington, there are some options that are publicly funded options, but they don't exist in our area. And having this available to this family and others like it is crucial. These parents see it as a lifesaver. We should promote equity by developing educational policy that increases the diversity of opportunities for all our kids and families rather than decreases them. And while we most certainly must make good decisions about what parts of our system are eligible for public dollars, we do have the ability to make wise policy decisions that express our shared values. The diversity of types of schools among the state's quote independent schools is vast, and policymakers need to take this diversity sufficiently into account. While H483 might be manageable for some independent schools, it could crush others, schools that are completely worthy of public support. And it is precisely this diversity that makes our educational landscape more responsive to our kids and families. We make bad decisions if we base them solely on isolated cost data without really understanding the educational pedagogy and relationships and settings. I urge you to vote no on this bill and refocus your policy work on promoting smaller and more diverse schools and schools within schools, and looking at pedagogy. We should be looking at educational process and pedagogy if we really want to make schools equitable and non-discriminatory and really serving the needs of all our families. More diverse schools are, in my view, the key to catalyzing improvement in our whole educational system. What Vermont's independent schools do have in common is they are all valuable resources in our overall educational landscape to help prepare students, all students, to contribute toward a more peaceful, prosperous, and just world. Our whole educational system shares that mission, and public policy should be crafted to promote these values. And maybe just before opening up to questions or discussion, our school has always seen itself as an ally to the overall educational system. And we resist making such strong distinctions and factions around public versus independent. And, you know, we're independent because we want to be progressive and we want to specialize in being able to help kids that we see need help in our community. And again, you know, I know it isn't the purview of this bill and this committee at this moment, but if you want to know where I really stand on my deepest values, I would like to see the state increase publicly funded smaller schools, diverse options, specialized programs where students can be known and seen. And that's what's going to address our problems with, you know, with mental health issues and with discrimination and with kids, all kids feeling like they have a place in school that is for them, where they can learn to become active democratic citizens. So that's how I feel about it.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Senator Hewitt, please.
I have a lot to say, but I'm not gonna say most of it. I'm just gonna ask one simple question at this point, which is, you referred to H43 several times as a provision. And that was well done. Your testimony was very eloquent.
And I tried.
Let the
All right,
Senator
sorry.
Hewitt.
But it was also very broad, and I'm wondering if you could focus in on some specific aspects of this bill that you have a problem with, or take umbrage with, or would like to see removed from the bill, or whatever. Just could you get a little more specific
Sure.
for us?
And I did say provisions in 483.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the provisions that, you know, and the devil in most of these things is in the details of how this really plays out, and which isn't always or often not at first written into law, but the provision that there can be no admissions process that includes interviews or learning about us for publicly funded students, learning about a student's academic record. That's one of the provisions that feels problematic for us, because it's so counter to the personalized approach that we use to enroll students.
Is that what you meant by blind acceptance policy?
Yeah. Yeah, I have on my computer, I don't have the law right in front of me.
We have
She's
it,
got
we
it,
have
yeah.
it, we found it. Senator Hashim, question?
No worries.
Senator Weeks.
Although,
Hold on, Senator Hewitt is going to take the floor. Go ahead.
So that's one piece of the bill that you, so the admissions piece. Are there any others?
and then the second one is the provision that the school needs to assure that no public tuition is going to, quote, subsidize private pay students. And again, that's an example where the devil will be in the details. And how does the accounting of that work? I think it's a misguided provision that inappropriately separates, you know, in a school like ours that's about half and half, that appropriately separates them and says, are these dollars going to them and those dollars going to those? And how is it going to be determined that, oh, the pupil cost and which parts go into pupil cost, and that this is a subsidizing situation? We have done our best to enroll low-income students by trying to make the whole thing work. And certainly, I can almost guarantee that any family that is a publicly funded town choice family would say, we're getting a great product for our town choice tuition that's coming to our school. We're 100% satisfied that the town tuition is supporting this learning community that creates something special for our kid. But I'm worried about how the accounting of that might work and if we might run afoul of that provision.
Just one second, are you good?
So just the two
Those
pieces.
are the
of-
two pieces.
Two pieces, okay, thank you.
So I did have Senator Weeks and then Senator Hashim.
Uh, I'll do one question at a time. So have you ever been in a situation where you had more students applying for the seats you had available?
Sadly, rarely.
Okay.
It has happened where we will cut off like a grade level where we'll say, okay, you know, we're grade 7 to 12 and we have 20 kids in grade 9 and we really have to cut off that grade level as being full at a given moment.
So did you ever have to kind of adjudicate between students, as far as
No,
which is the better fit?
No, we would do it first come, first serve.
First come, first served.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Hashim and Senator Williams.
So just to Senator Weeks' point, so with this bill, what I'm reading is that independent schools can set a capacity limit on the number of publicly tuitioned students they can accept. Is that everyone else's interpretation of this?
Yep, that is in there.
So I'm looking to Liz Council for confirmation.
Yes, they can.
Thank you.
And I think what I did want to flag for further discussion is the conversation as to how the accounting would work, as was brought up with public dollars not subsidizing private students and how that would look. I mean, is it, that money isn't allowed to be used to pay the teachers, or it's not allowed to be used for books, or what's the definition of subsidizing the other students is what I'd like to
It's a great question.
figure out.
It's a
Now,
great
you
question.
already asked it.
No, we heard about that. So subsidizing,
Please.
you tell me to keep quiet.
It went over my head.
Okay, it just means that you're charging more for these other students, the tuition students. The rate is higher than what you would charge for your private students.
So just.
That's subsidizing, meaning that whatever the delta is between the two, that's a subsidy, which they don't, this bill doesn't.
Okay, got it. So what you're saying is that it has to do with the tuition, not other,
That was my understanding from previous testimony.
than I must.
Liz Council, any clarification?
So I'm thinking it's off the legislative council. I think that's really intent on behind the language. The language just, there's a specific provision that talks about tuition. And then there's a requirement that there's insurance that the public tuition is not being used to subsidize private payer students, but there's no more specificity regarding the use of the term subsidize.
So then, does that mean that money, that there could potentially be issues with using that money to pay for things like books or field trips or other things? Or is it just tuition, as Senator Weeks was pointing out? Or is it just uncertain?
I don't think the bill is that specific.
Thank you.
We should come back to this. It could get messy. Okay. Senator Williams.
Just a comment, I'll try and frame it eventually into a question, but your point about the transgender child who came there because she was being mistreated in a public school.
Yeah.
That should never happen. Everybody has the same standard. So the fact that she came to your school makes your school important to me because the family feels that she can come there and be treated properly. That's a systemic problem. And maybe my question is that, to the group, what can we do with the public schools to make sure it doesn't happen? But if we do that, then it makes your school less important.
I mean, from my view, as an educator, that would be a great result. and a great problem to have.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not here to say our school has to exist per se. But I am saying that our school provides amazing service to kids and is worthy of support.
And I appreciate that point that you brought up because it adds clarity to the issues about the bill.
And I will say, like, this is one of the common and repeated stories of our school is kids that their families are like, our kids are falling through the cracks. They have this learning profile and it just isn't getting dealt with well. And I'm a real believer in small schools. That's just like, if you have a smaller community where kids are doing well, then it makes a lot of these problems be able to be solved in a much more organic and integrated whole way. So we have kids that have suffered, racial harassment. We have lots of kids that are just too anxious and uptight in larger settings, and having our caring hands and our loving little alternative school is what they need. And then, as I said, there's a whole host of kids that could be successful in a more traditional setting, but they like our model.
But you're not considered a therapeutic school.
No.
Thank you. I recently was listening to an On the Media third part of a 3-part series on poverty, and there's a great quote at the beginning of the show that if you look at the Houston, Texas, and this is germane, if you look at the Houston, Texas public school, the district, and if you looked at that district and all of the kids within that district went to their public schools, the poverty rate in their district would be 40%. If you look at it today, it's 80% because so many of those kids don't go to the public schools. So my question to you, because you keep bringing up the word small.
So which kids don't go to public school?
Apparently kids that are above the poverty line,
Okay.
if I were to do the math.
Right.
So you keep bringing up small schools
Mhm.
and how fabulous they are, and I would tend to agree with you, they are absolutely fabulous. So they're also expensive, and I'm wondering if you look at a state like Burlington, can we afford to create all of these tiny little schools all over the state? Or what would that
She meant
cost?
city. She loves Burlington.
Burlington
She
could be its own
Sorry.
state.
No, you said state.
We
You said
know-
state of Burlington.
We know what I did.
State of Vermont.
That's why they elect her.
I also represent Winooski, which is a minority majority school, and Essex and Colchester, so a chunk of Chittenden County. But if we were to take, let's say, Chittenden County and chunk it up into all these tiny little schools, what would the cost be to the state? And can you quantify that at all? Because I love your idea. I'm
Well,
wondering if it's viable.
I mean, I'm a little bit in over my head with an economic analysis off the cuff on that. However, I would dispute the assumption that small schools are immediately more expensive. We run our school as a small school at a per pupil cost that's lower than virtually all public schools. And I think there can be a lot of expense that comes from the consolidation and systemization and creating that, administrative infrastructure that can be eliminated when you have a small enough community that you can operate organically. And so, it's a great question, but I would definitely dispute that just assuming that small schools are more expensive.
So one of the aspects of the bill is prohibiting cross-border school transfers in a township within 25 miles. Do you have any New Hampshire or Massachusetts students in your school?
We do have a few New Hampshire students there, but there's no, public money that goes to have an
Do you have any thought as a school, this?
It seems like that the provision of in the proposed law is more about not wanting Vermont money to head out.
That's right. No, so sometimes to prove a point, I like to kind of go the opposite and then maybe it makes a little more sense.
And just to
Yeah,
add to that, sometimes we don't want any states saying, we won't send money.
Right.
So that's the other piece of it. There is that, I've heard.
So we've never tried to get public money from New Hampshire.
Okay,
So we never tried to do that. And we have, private pay families who will give financial aid to if their economics require it, but they're just treated as.
It's like, I guess maybe more to the point, how close are you to the border?
Oh, it's-
New Hampshire.
you can see it.
I can almost spit on it. The school, not that,
Okay.
the school is we're right on the river. I can look across and see New Hampshire right across the river.
Okay, very good. All right, good.
Yeah.
That's another.
Yeah, please.
Does your school have, maintain a school endowment of any type that kind of supplements tuition? It's fair.
Yeah. No, we started our school and we just have been balancing our budgets every year. And we haven't successfully.
Okay, that's fine. It's not a,
Yeah.
it's a background question for other aspects of the bill. And then, obviously, you have tuition costs. Do you also charge fees, academic fees of any type, in a fee category?
Yeah, we do have some fees and understand that, a provision in the proposed bill here is that you couldn't charge fees on top of the publicly approved tuition for tuition students. It's a small enough thing that wouldn't be a deal breaker for us to stop.
But any comment on fees versus tuition? I mean, possibly you could just label everything as tuition versus fee and
Yeah.
kind of like go underneath the carpet with this particular rule.
Yeah, I mean, we just established a couple of $100 as fees. And that would be a deal breaker for us to just say everything has to be within tuition.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Anything else, committee? Ms. Schoenberg, thank you so much for making
All
the
right.
trip. We
Thank you.
appreciate
Our
it.
Thanks a lot.
sympathy for your legislative delegation that you have to deal with.
All right, thank you so much.
He's great, for the record. He's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
He's great.
No, we're
He's great.
proud.
He's on the 30, trying to get a 30.
It's a one seat district, or do you have a district?
2 seats.
No, we like her too.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Stay right there.
Thanks again.
All of you for your service.
Thank you all very much, and thanks everyone that we are adjourned. Quick